Okay, let's go into builds now. All right, builds is another part of the things that you do all the time, right? So the main things that you're going to be doing, you go to growth to do your build, you go to military to train your people, and you go to science to allocate your books. These things, anytime you log in, you want to make sure that they've been done. So builds, I didn't have to check because I know I don't have any new acres. Science, every tick you generate new books. So anytime you log in, you want to allocate them. Right? I'm not going to do it now because I don't want to waste time. Military, you're probably going to always be training. I'll go over I'll make a specific draft guide. But anyway, we're talking about builds. So here is the builds guide that I posted. I get it, it's really long. But it's important to know you want to have 3 base builds, right? If you're newer, if you're more experienced, you probably already can just kind of feel it out. But yeah, for the beginning, you probably want to have 3 base builds. Now I'll show you what I mean by that. I'll just show you now. So you go to growth. Down here, you can save builds. You cannot see the drop downs. Okay, if you click this drop down, if you click there, it actually pops up a little drop down where you can select a build that you've saved. So we'll go for an example right now. Let's just zero everything out. Okay, everything is zeroed out. Now, what I like to do is open the forums in a new tab. Click on builds, right? Let's start with a war build. Find you, right? Are you playing a full attacker? Are you playing a thief mage? Are you playing a thief mage that's a little bit more focused on thievery instead of magic? Are you playing a hybrid attack thief? Are you playing mage? Or are you playing a bank? Based on what you're playing, so let's go, what should we pick? Let's go with a bank, all right? So you can keep this open in a separate tab while you're doing these things. So it says 20% homes, 8% farms. So let's just do it 2 at a time. So you put in 20% homes, 8% farms, 12% towers, 10% banks, 12% towers, 10% banks, 15% forts, 20% guilds, 15% forts, 20% guilds, and 10% watchtower. 10% watchtower. Now, this particular build only has 5 remaining, and technically it doesn't, because if you're playing a fairy or a dwarf, it goes up to 100. So let's pretend we're playing a fairy bank. So we would need to go up to 17% on towers. So that's 100. Now, this build is the only build that I have posted where you don't have any flex, right? Flex is, so like if you look at hybrid attack mage, I leave 15% flex. That means you can adjust it. You can add 15% of a whole other building if you want, or you can increase like more of the same buildings you already have, or whatever, right? Now, part of the main reason for this is because most of these you're gonna be, it's just to give you some wiggle room. That's the reason. And even with a more stringent build, you still have wiggle. Like if you don't really want to go that high on forts, instead you want to have maybe you have offense and you want a little bit of extra offense. You can do some training grounds, some stables, instead of some, you can play around with this, all right? So I recommend clicking save. So when you do, you click save, you type in a name, war build for you or whatever, and you click the save button. Once you've clicked the save button, it will be in here in this drop down that you can't see, unfortunately. But when you click on it, you can go to the build that you saved. All right. So let's go to the war build that I currently have saved for this province, which I don't actually know when I built this because I don't really use these anymore. But so what you would do is you would click fill in, right? Now, in order to reach the numbers that I have on this janky build, this is what I need, right? I need that many more homes and yada, yada, yada. Obviously, right now I have 0 available acres. So when you're converting a build, you would go to this raise tab up here. And you can do the same thing. You can click on war build, you can click fill in, and it will tell you how much of the buildings that you have that you need to get rid of in order to be able to build those things, right? So I would click destruction to blow those buildings up. Then those would be available undeveloped land for me to build. I can go back to that war build, click fill in, thanks. Now that's an expensive way to do it. I'm not saying you should do it that way. Better would be to, like, as you're gaining acres from either attacking or exploring or casting paradise, or, you know, the daily amount of acres you get every 24 hours, every first of the utopian month, you get a certain amount of acres, and you can, you know, adjust your build with those little acres. Also, you can, you know, destroy a little bit at a time. Say, like, you're like, okay, I don't need as many guilds, so I'll destroy like 20 of those. Click order destruction. Now you have 20 acres to build stuff here, right? You don't have to do it all at once. You can take things slow because, you know, you make a certain amount of money per tick. You don't always have the money you need, and worse is to have a whole bunch of unbuilt acres. You'd rather have them built at all times. So you can do this, you know, slowly throughout time. But anyway, definitely check out the builds guide there. So that's one build, right? The war build. You want to have one of those saved. The other thing about flex that I wanted to talk about, especially for attackers, I have 30% flex here. Why that is because attackers tend to have a lot of influx of acres. They're constantly attacking, bringing new acres in, getting attacked, losing their acres. So I'm trying to make it kind of like an easy minimum, right, to reach. Because you're constantly having acres shuffling. The other thing about it is flex is also because it depends on who we're going to war with. If we're warring a kingdom that has, let's say, 5 halfling rogues, you're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of thievery. Well, you probably want to include some watchtowers. Watchtowers protect against thievery, so you probably want to run some watchtowers in your build. But if we're going against a kingdom that has like 0 rogues, and you're like, wow, they don't have any rogues, maybe 1 or 2 heretics, you know, not too scary, then you probably don't want any watchtowers at all. You could just run a little bit higher thieves, and maybe run even some thieves then to make your own thieves per acre high, and you should be fine. But yeah, there's options here. It's still good to read these things, you know, they're written for you. You can save the builds here. All right, the next example is a peacetime. Now for this, I did a generic build for everyone, no matter what race personality. Importantly, and this is important for all the builds, let's say you're playing undead. Undead do not need farms, right? So if I'm saying something like, oh, X amount of farms, and you're playing undead, please don't build the farms. In fact, if you're playing undead, the first thing you should do is raise all of your farms. You do not need food. If you want to run like 2 or 3% farms, just to be able to hand out to people who are starving or to fund dragons, okay, play for the team, I like it. But you do not need farms as an undead. Similarly, with Dark Elf, you don't need rooms. So same thing as undead, you know, if you want to run like maybe 3% towers or so, just to have some runes generating. Now it's a little more important with runes because, you know, we're casting a ritual every once in a while. So it's nice to have that extra bit of runes to aid out to people, or to cast your own rituals. But in war, if you're a dark elf and you have a few extra towers, you can send those runes to your mages, so that the mages can do their spells, right? The other mages, the mages that need runes like that. But yeah, so this is a generic build for like peacetime. If we're not at war, we're not necessarily intending to go to war, we're just kind of camping out, pumping, stuff like that. There's the build you look up. Now, the other build that I don't have in here is the End of War Ceasefire build. Oh, it's the game. Ticking means it's a new hour. It just turned 11:08. There we go. It's done. All right. So the last build that you want to save is actually posted in this End of War Ceasefire. Now, this guide is important when we're in a war ceasefire. So I wouldn't prioritize looking at this just now, but when we're in a war, about to finish the war, that's when you want to refer to this guide. I try to post everything in the Royal Commands, like a miniature to-do list. And most of that should be enough, but it is a good idea to kind of take a look at this and follow what's going on. But the build is where you want to save, right? So this one's the easy one. If you want to start with the build for End of War Ceasefire, this is probably the easiest one to make. You want enough farms so that you're not starving. I say 10% because in the beginning of the game you need about 10%. Of course, if you're a dwarf, you need more. If you're an undead, you need less. If you're an artisan, you need less. If you have enough science, you need adjust it to your province. Banks, I say 20%. Usually that's enough, especially if you don't need to pump any elites. But if you're playing a race that needs to pump elites, like Fairy's probably the biggest one. Dark Elf, or pretty much everybody except for maybe Elf or Halfling. If you're playing a full Thief Mage, then you don't need to pump elites as a Halfling, or I think that might be it. I think everybody else. So that's it. But let's say you finish a war and you have a ton of elites and you didn't really lose any. If you don't need to pump that many, well, then you don't necessarily need that many banks. Towers, 10%. Now the reason I say that is because we're going to be casting a ritual right away in End of War Ceasefire. Next time we're probably going to go with Ascendancy so we can really pump our wizards. And then we cast another ritual like 2 days later to do our training. And then we'll be casting another ritual. So towers are important. And the rest of your build, you have like 60% left. You want to put it into guilds and or universities. Now I say and or, but there's a specific thing here. Guilds, you can do as high as you want. There's no maximum for guilds. You'll be training that many wizards. Universities, there's no reason to really ever go above 30%. Really, 25% is already pretty high. You can go up to even like 40%, I think, and still get some benefit of it, but I don't recommend it, especially because most people need to pump wizards too. So, I would say at max for universities, 30. So that would be 30% guilds, 30% universities. Pretty standard, right? Pretty straightforward. But let's say we're going to do Ascendancy like next time. Let's say, since we're going to be losing so much on science anyway, everybody just put in 60% guilds. Let's pump the crap. But yeah, anyway, that's about it for build. These guides are a lot longer. I'm a really chatty person. I'm wordy when I write. I'm wordy when I talk. I'm sorry. You're just going to have to deal.